Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Devox's first new startup track. So this is a bit of an experiment that Devox is running this year, and judging by the numbers in the room, it was a good idea, so that's fantastic. Quick question before I get started. Who here is currently in a startup? Ooh, fair few of you. Who here would like to get into a startup or is thinking of starting a startup? Wow, that's really cool. Too many of you have been watching Hacker News in Silicon Valley, clearly. So this talk is going to be a general talk about all aspects of startups and the lessons I myself have learned in the past 2.5 years. First being the founder, then CTO, and recently I was demoted to CEO of our company. I don't recommend that, by the way, especially if you're technical. So, being a startup ninja. If you read Hacker News and if you read all of the blog posts and you travel over to Silicon Valley and talk to the cool young kids with beards, drinking their lattes with their Macintosh laptops and Starbucks, they sort of tell you about being lean and agile and being a ninja, and you've got to iterate and you've got to accelerate that growth curve, and the VCs will give you 20 million in your Series A. It's a load of nonsense. So who am I? For those of you who don't know me, my name's Martijn. I used to give sort of talks about methodology and technology and Java as a Diabolical Developer. These days I'm a boring CEO, so my life is all about spreadsheets, marketing plans, sales, and dealing with the enemy, otherwise known as customers. So first little public service announcement I'd like to make especially is actually about Java 9 coming out in early 2015. It's going to be a little bit of a nuclear bomb on the Java industry. And the reason is, with Project Jigsaw coming in with modularization, things like rt.jar, which lots of you rely on, and tools.jar, and the whole structure of Java itself will be going away. So for many of you who might rely on these things, I strongly advise you to take note of the email addresses and websites on this page and go back to your organizations internally and say, this tidal wave is coming, we need to test for it early. That's just my little public service announcement, which I'll be doing at all of my talks today. Back to the topic at hand. So, what do? We're a company called jClarity. We do performance analysis software, primarily for Java and JVM-based stacks. We have a garbage collection log analyzer, which basically tells you exactly what's happening with GC. And we have another product called Illuminate, which is, we think, the more interesting one. It's a performance diagnostic engine. And what we've managed to do is we've used machine learning to learn from all these different applications and all these different software environments what key metrics combined together actually tell you what your performance bottleneck is. So if your website or your application isn't responding in a couple of seconds and you don't know why, typically you start looking at your code, you might look at the garbage collection, you might see if the server's gone down completely. You actually have no idea, right? So what our software does is it tells you very quickly exactly where the problem is. It only took us about 12 months of research and development with 2 PhDs who are far smarter than I am to get this done. So a few other interesting things. We use lots of bleeding edge technology, which is always very dangerous. And we had to try and learn, instead of just being technologists, having this cool technology, to also build a company around it. And that, as it turns out, is the hard part. So I'm going to cover a whole bunch of different things. Why being lean and agile in a startup really matters. Because if you don't have that attitude, you're dead in the water. I'm going to talk a little bit about being a ninja, or how actually not to be a ninja. There is a lot of hype and bullshit out there, especially if you read things like Hacker News on the web. I'm going to repeat that phrase at least 20 times today. Who here reads Hacker News? Keep your hand up if you want to be involved in a startup. Okay, good. Don't read Hacker News if you are going to be involved in a startup. Just actually get on with doing your startup. And I'm going to talk about some lessons we've learned in the last 2.5 years. This is going to be the war stories. My lawyers are generally really not happy with me talking about this stuff, but I kind of figure it's worthwhile. There's not many of us who do startups, and they are damn hard. So I want to try and tell, especially the new people in the room, some of the pitfalls you should try and avoid. So everybody thinks that startups are going to be like this. One giant party, right? You're getting together with some of your favorite friends. In my case, I got together with Kirk Pepperdine sitting in the front here, another guy, Ben Evans, I know well from the technology scene, an investor we knew quite well. And when we first signed the document together to start the company, we were on cloud nine. We thought we were going to build the next $50 million company. We were going to have yachts in Monaco, so on and so forth. And, we would leave things like DevOps behind. We'd be too busy partying with the superstars over in Silicon Valley. Next, public service announcements. Take what I say today with a large grain of salt. We have been around for about 2.5 years. We have customers and revenue. And by any stretch of the imagination, that's a pretty darn good start for a startup. Okay, most startups fail. The vast majority of them fail in the first year, and a lot of them leave tattered friendships, ruined families, and certainly ruined finances behind. So first of all, the lean and agile piece to this. Why it's so important. There's a fantastic video which you probably want to watch, so take note of this URL. It's a parody of being a lean startup ninja, and someone's in there talking about doing Scrum and having sprints and iterating. If you're iterating and adding value, then your company will magically grow. Just make sure you keep iterating. Yeah. So why do people talk about being lean and agile? Why is it so important to the startup life? This is your idea, right? You've got this wonderful, brilliant idea. Who here thinks you're going to build the next Facebook? Go on, own up. Yes, there's one over there. There's always one. There's always one. There's always one. So this gentleman over here, and I'm going to pick on you now, has got this beautiful new idea, right? Your idea is worth shit. That is the one lesson you need to learn with your startup, right? Your idea, the original idea that you have, it's going to pivot within the first year. And it sure as hell isn't going to survive meeting the enemy, which is actually creating a company or a product or a service around the idea. Okay? In the London School of Economics, in London where I come from, they're crapping out 100 MBA students who have got more ideas than you can throw a stick at. Right? All of those MBAs, the smart ones anyway, are desperately looking for their CTO co-founder, because they've at least been taught that you've got to try and build your idea into something which is concrete. Okay? So if you think here that you've got some special idea which you are going to file a patent for straight away, and you want to make sure everyone signs an NDA who you talk to, seriously, don't bother. Focus on actually trying to build something around the idea. It's a product or a service that people will pay for that matters. So your idea is not worth crap. Another image to talk about that. You are not a unique and beautiful snowflake. Most ideas, almost every single idea I've ever run across, and I get hundreds pitched to me every year, are not unique by any stretch of the imagination. So whatever you think you're doing, someone else has also thought of that idea, which means someone else is probably working on building a product or a service around it. So the trick is to be faster and smarter and more agile than they are. So at jClarity, we transitioned our product several times. We've transitioned market several times. We originally thought we were going to be a cloud-based software as a service company aimed at all of you, right? Every individual developer in this room, all 9 million Java developers, were going to use our service. Okay? Within about the first 3 months of meeting contact with the enemy, that is, you guys, our customers, we realized that individual developers don't like paying money for things. So basically, you guys suck as customers. No offense. So we had to pivot back to the enterprise, because at least enterprise customers have got checkbooks. But they come with their own challenges, like 9-month-long sales cycles and things. Or, no, we're not going to go out to your public cloud software as a service offering. You have to come on-premise. You have to wear a suit and tie and come hang out with us for a week, because that's what we expect. So we've had to pivot lots. We've transitioned. The original business plan we have is now torn up and thrown in a bin. So expect this to happen to you as well. If you are going to write any sort of business plan, or if you're going to write any sort of roadmap for you and your company and your idea, here are the key points that you need to follow. Who is actually going to buy or use your product or service? This is absolutely key. And if you have in your business plan 20 to 35-year-old middle-class white male developers in Belgium, don't do that, right? Your customer needs to be a specific person in your mind. It has to be Joanne, a 19-year-old recent graduate in computer science from the University of Ghent, who no longer wants to work in Java, wants to work with her colleagues on some sort of cloud-based IDE, right? So if you've got some sort of IDE startup, that's your key customer. Or Bob is a 55-year-old grandfather. Facebook, the user interface is too complicated for him. He just wants something he can use with simple 2-click buttons to connect with his grandchildren, right? Something very specific like that. Why they will use your product? There has to be a why. There has to be an emotional reaction to what it is you're selling, right? Most websites you see for product and service companies, the ones that aren't doing very well, they have the what or the how on their website. They say what they do or what their product is or how they built it. But they don't say why you should use it. Okay, so in jClarity's case, we have some marketing material, for example, which says, have you ever had that sinking feeling when you get a production support call? Who here has had a production support call? And you go, oh shit, there goes the rest of my week, right? Because you've got no idea what's going to happen. Usually, especially if it's a performance outage. So that's our this is why you should use our products, because we take that feeling away from you. Okay, so that's kind of our why. And the last point is how they will give you money. So we originally thought that you, the developers, were going to give us money, and we were absolutely dead wrong about that. So the how they will give you money is key. So we now work with enterprises mainly, and they give us money in sort of big, large quarterly amounts, right? They have these really long sales cycles, really long budgetary cycles. So you have to plan your company around that. You may not get paid for 3, 6, 9 months. So some of the things we do to keep us, that helped allow us to transition from market to market, change our product. We did, typical agile stuff. We do stand-ups in the morning. The most important thing we do is we did do retrospectives every week. And this is absolutely key. When you're in a startup and things are going badly, and you don't have a lot of money, because most startups don't, you can't let things drag on badly for months on end. Okay? You really have to change and pivot very, very quickly. So every single week we look back at the week we've just had and we really beat ourselves up and say, did we keep our customers happy? Are we keeping our products simple? Are we still fulfilling the vision of our company? So on and so forth. And usually if we're drifting away from that within 2-3 weeks, we change very, very quickly. Another thing is we're brutally honest with our clients. We always tell our clients when we screw up, we tell them how we screwed up, why we screwed up, and why we're not going to go do it again. And customers are your most important thing when you're a startup. And being brutally honest with them actually really, really helps. A lot of companies don't do this. They like to hide problems away from their customers. Don't. Just actually tell the truth. Much like me speaking here to the audience, when you're at a conference, you typically want to enjoy the talk, you typically want to be on the side of the speaker, and you'll be surprised that with customers as well, that they actually, a lot of them want to be on your side. They've already bought your product or your service, so they want it to succeed, and they'll actually be very helpful to you. So, some lessons on where we failed to start off with. We didn't validate our early product against users, real users, early enough. So the problem we had is we were in our own little bubble. We ourselves in the company have a whole bunch of performance tuning experts. And most of the people we hang out with in the Java community are leaders in their fields and are also experts. But they're actually not our customers. Our customers is Joe Java sitting in a cubicle farm in Atlanta, Georgia, with 40 other Java developers with the How to Code Java in 24 Hours book under his arm. That's our real customer. And it took us a long time to figure this out. Actually, we'll go back to the other more important point. Revenue, revenue, revenue. If you are going to have a startup, which is an idea, and you still have to build the product and the service first before you can even push it out to even think before you can sell it and market it, your company is already in a lot of trouble. Okay? You really, really want to try and get revenue in day one and be self-sufficient from day one. So if you have to do some training or consulting on the side, consider doing it. More importantly, if you can get a customer to pay for your product development up front, definitely go and do that. Okay. Some common tricks you can use, for example, are to even just put up a simple web page, just with a simple sign-up form saying, if we built this thing, would you be interested? And go and market that for a week or two. And if you get 20,000 sign-ups, for example, you actually know you've got a valid market. Right? It hasn't cost you anything to go build out your idea yet. So, see a few people doing this. Kickstarter in particular does this extremely well. So I talked a little bit before about cargo cults, where basically the issue is that we ourselves weren't our customer. And the not invented here syndrome is another bad one as well. It's very tempting when you're building a product or a service that you're going to build the whole thing from scratch, and you find yourselves 18 months later that you still haven't got a product ready to push out to the market. So I highly recommend, I'll go into technology section later, that you build on top of giants, you build on top of existing open source components in particular, and other services and things very quickly. So this is where you actually end up. The idea and the product and the service you started with gets changed very quickly, and it gets changed by the people who use it. So as an example, Sensum, which is our garbage collection log analyzer, we just assumed certain production support teams would use it to identify and solve and fix memory problems with Java in their teams. And we certainly have quite a few customers who have bought it for that exact purpose. Then a customer came to us and said, you know what, this would be a great capacity planning tool because it actually tells us how much memory is being used for Java. And we have a plant of about 10,000 JVMs, and we're trying to decide when we're building our new private cloud how much to provision for that. So could you guys get a version out of Sensum which could tell us that, please? And I went, okay, how big is your check? And we're still negotiating on how big that check's going to be. But it could very well be that the original vision we had for Sensum as this really deep dive analytical tool for solving garbage collection problems, it's actually looking like our main revenue stream may, we don't know yet, but may come from it being a capacity planning tool. It's a huge pivot, right? It's a major change in direction. Certainly not something we thought of originally. So not invented here syndrome, again, I was working with one startup who wrote their own web framework for their website. Absolute insanity. Now, despite certain tools like Mongodb and Maven proving to be very frustrating to use at times, you really do want to work with existing technologies as much as you can. Right, so that's a little bit about your idea. Don't bother writing a business plan, just write a very short one-pager. Make sure you know who your target market is, why they would use your thing, and then how they're going to give you money. Really, really important. I know it's popular in Silicon Valley and in consumer-based startups to simply build something, get a couple of million users, and then try and figure out how to monetize it. Call me old-fashioned, but I actually like people paying for the stuff I build. And you start to find a lot of those companies who've built out that model, they're really struggling. Okay, one or two of them have actually made it big. Twitter, for example, I think only recently became profitable. It may still not even be profitable, right? They're still burning through cash. It's not a business I would personally want to invest in. Right, being a ninja. So I'm going to cover some sort of tips and tricks we use to make sure we keep our run rates low. So the biggest thing that you worry about when you have a startup, because you almost have no money or you have somebody else's money, is spending that money. And the key to it is not to spend the money. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do to not spend money. Number one, automation. Automation is absolutely key. Our company is very, very small. We have 1, 2, 3 permanent staff or 3 full-time staff. We have about another 3 or 4 people who are part-time, anything from sort of 50% of their time to 10% of their time. So I don't have room for a network administrator, a system administrator, a DBA, a release person, a QA person, HR, all that sort of stuff. Not that you should never have HR anyway. They're legal compliance, they're horrible. So what we do is we made sure right from the start we automated everything we did. So when we can release to production, it's a 2-button click process. When we release to test, 2-button click process. When we build images for our customers, it's a 1-click button process, so on and so forth. Now I'll talk a little bit about running the rest of your company through software as well. So the philosophy to follow is what Netflix do. They have a tool called Chaos Monkey. Chaos Monkey actually deliberately goes around their production servers and just nukes them. That's how they know their infrastructure and their automation works. I highly recommend it when you start your startup. If you want to build a really robust service from day one, use Chaos Monkey. Be brave. The only problem with automation is this guy. Has everyone seen Napoleon Dynamite? So I've got ninja skills, nunchuck skills, writing skills, so on and so forth. The list of skills you need to know for automating your stack is huge. And as Java developers, a lot of us are very, very poor at this stuff, right? So configuring Linux IP tables, understanding how network traffic flows in and out of AWS and EC2 and things. It's a very, very different skill set, and it's one that unfortunately that you or your technical co-founder is going to have to pick up very, very quickly. It also unfortunately means learning Ruby, which just makes everybody very sad. But the best tools out there, Puppet and Chef, for automating, from your continuous integration server out to actual production releases and building boxes and stuff, is kind of in Ruby. And there's a whole bunch of Linux virtualization stuff. Docker currently is the new fun kid on the block, if you're into that. But you will need to pick this up. Because if you don't, you have to hire 2 or 3 manual engineers, staff, to run this for you. And that's your run rate's just gone up through the roof, right? And no investor will ever agree to that plan. Another key thing is everything must be a first-class citizen. Right, it's really tempting to start up, because most of you people here are technical in this room, that your product and your service, you guys are going to do a really good job of building that out first class, and we'll worry about the CRM system later. We'll just get Cousin Joe to hack up the website. We'll have a manual mailing list. We'll do our accounting in a spreadsheet, so on and so forth. All right, a startup, your product is only one pillar of your startup, right? All the other pillars matter just as much, and it's kind of one of those weakest link games. Whatever the weakest link is in your company, it will drag the rest of it right down. So if you have a really manual process for even simple things like raising an invoice for your customer, and that takes 15 minutes of your time, and you have to do that for 10 customers, you've just lost 2.5 hours. Right? That can kill your company very quickly. Having a manual payroll system can kill your company very quickly, so on and so forth. So all the technology stacks that you have within your company, so not just the product or service you're building, everything has to be first class. So if you're going to build a website, do it in a first class way. If you're going to have a payroll system or a CRM system or a human resources system, do it in a world-class way. Otherwise it'll hold your business up very, very quickly. Technical debt is a massive problem in a startup. You cannot afford to have it. Okay, because as soon as you build up enough technical debt that it takes your company a 3 or 4 week rewrite to rewrite the product, your customers are gone, your competitors have leapfrogged you, so on and so forth. Just ask the people who worked at Netscape Navigator how technical debt worked out for them. Not so well. Picking the right technology. We more or less follow the Matt Rabel principle, which is you list a whole bunch of criteria for the technology that you want to use, and this is for any aspect of your business, right? Whether you're building your service, your product, or picking the next payroll system. Set a whole bunch of criteria, add the weightings to it of what is really important to your business. Is it internationalization? Is it the fact that we can hire lots of contractors on that technology? Is it that it must horizontally scale? So on and so forth. You get everybody in your company to go away and research different options, and you throw them all up on a spreadsheet like this. And this is Matt comparing Java web frameworks back in 2012. As you can see, we still have things like Wicket and JSF2 on there, even Tapestry and Stripes. Woo. So you see all these categories down the side here. So developer productivity, is there good testing for it? Was there REST support? So on and so forth. And they put weightings on all these things, and they took the top 2, which in this case were Spring MVC, I think, and Grails, and then they went away and they prototyped the hardest thing they were going to do for their product or their service in that technology, and then they went away and picked the best one. So for us, we've managed to avoid many of the pitfalls of picking bad technologies. There's only one I'm going to talk about a little bit later, which is MongoDB, which was an okay choice. In hindsight, would probably choose something else, but generally speaking, this has allowed us to not pick technologies which have shot us in the foot later. Another key thing about your product or service is usability. So unfortunately, Apple has ruined it for everybody. You can no longer say, oh, we'll just code up this piece of functionality and we'll worry about the pretty stuff later. People demand and expect an absolutely seamless experience right from day one. And this has been really interesting for us in the enterprise in particular, and one of the reasons why people really in the enterprise enjoy using our products, the jClarity products, is we worked really hard on the user interface. Sensum is a Swing desktop application at the moment, and the comments we've had from customers is they said, oh, we thought this was a browser. It's so nice to use. It's really nice and modern. So we put a lot of work into making sure that the user interface and the user experience was really, really good. And a lot of the enterprise products we're competing against are still very old school, and they have horrible Windows Explorer-like interfaces and things. And that's been a big bonus for us. So we've got our own in-house UI UX experts. You have to have one. You absolutely have to have one. So one of the key sort of cornerstones of if you're building a product or a service that you're going to sell out to people, get a usability expert in right from the very beginning. They're really important. One of the things we have failed to do is running enough studies and labs with users. So that's something that we're going to sort of work on early next year. Right, and here are all the quick lessons from our startup life. Especially about the vultures, vampires, and sharks. If you're starting to do well, everybody wants a piece of you, and they always want your equity. Don't give it to them. Never give it to them. Minimal viable products. And there are lots of definitions of this. I'll go through each one in turn. So the one that I like the most is the top one. Your minimum viable product should be something that someone is willing to give you revenue for. And so many people forget this. And so many developers and engineers are too perfectionist about what they build. And they say, our product isn't quite ready yet. We need to build one more screen. It's missing this extra piece of functionality. And we made this mistake at jClarity initially. I was the CTO at the time, and I kept delaying releases of our product because I wasn't quite 100% happy with a small aspect of it. And we had customers knocking on our door saying, look, just give us what you've got. We'll actually pay you money for it. So definitely don't do what I did. And if someone's willing to give you any amount of cash, even if you're going to call it an alpha, or a beta version, let them go do it. And there are a few other minimum viable product ideas here, but realistically speaking, if someone's willing to give you money for it, it's good enough. Go push it out the door. Equity investors. So you'll read a lot of blog posts about valuations, terminology like pre and post. Investors use a very special language. They use lots of acronyms like we do in technology, and they will try and pull the wool over your eyes. Okay. Investors love dealing with engineers because engineers are idealists and they don't typically think about money first. And they usually just wave their hands and say, yeah, that sounds fair, that sounds reasonable. And they don't take the time to learn the terminology and understand how the investment world works. You absolutely have to understand how this world works. I can tell you so many horror stories of personal friends of mine who started very successful companies that are worth tens, if not hundreds of millions of US dollars today. They've walked out of it with nothing. Right? They put their heart and soul into these companies, ruined their families, their lives, everything. And because they didn't understand how investment worked, they got diluted and diluted and diluted so much that their personal worth at the end of the day was worth nothing. And they got forced out of the company because they no longer had a controlling interest. So it's all about the percentages. People will try and talk to you about, but if you take on this much money, we'll value you at this, and therefore you'll be worth 400,000 euros. Isn't that great? Don't worry about the fact that your percentages dropped from 35 down to 25. You're worth more, so you're doing better. Okay, ignore those liars. They are thieves. They're trying to steal your company away from you. So whatever you do, only ever think about equity in terms of percentages. How much percentage of the company do I still own after I've raised money or after XYZ event has happened? And if your percentage has gone down, you're losing. That's pretty much end of story. So never try and take on investment, and when you do, fight tooth and nail to keep as much percentage for yourself as possible. It's very, very important. When you do start a company with yourself and your colleagues, and you're going to split the company up in equity, however you guys feel it's equitable, 10% of the company is immediately not yours. Okay, if you think you're going to grow a big company and have an IPO and build the next Facebook or whatever, in order to recruit the world-class people you're going to need to be able to build that business, your chief revenue officer, maybe your financial chief, perhaps your CTO or CEO, they will only ever come and work and bleed their lives out alongside you if you're going to give them equity. And most companies need to set aside an option pool of about 10% roughly. Okay, so just remember that even when you start your company, 10% of it is no longer yours. And as soon as investors come along, even less of it is yours. So fundraising. Fundraising takes an awful lot of time. It usually takes about 3 months of dedicated effort from usually the CEO and maybe a few other people to run around all the different investors that are out there. In Europe it is especially difficult because there's not really a startup culture here. There is a sort of one in Berlin, there's one in London, but outside of that it's pretty poor. So a lot of you have to fly across the Silicon Valley and hold your hat out and do the rounds. So you can spend an awful lot of time fundraising. Again, try and avoid this. If you can have customers and revenue from the start, you don't have to waste your time running around with your hat out. You don't have to lose equity in your company. You can stand on your own 2 feet. And when you do take investment, then you can do it purely because you want to grow more quickly, not because you can't pay your rent tomorrow. So I really like this. I had a great conversation with David Blevins last night, and he laid out his principle on Series A, B, and C. When you get a Series A, it means the investors believe in you, your team, and your vision, and everybody's happy. All right, go out and just build it. Then most companies burn through that money by buying bean bags, taking the company out on holiday, buying expensive laptops, partying in Mallorca, so on and so forth, and then they have to hold their head out for a Series B. And at that stage, the investors go, well, we can't trust you guys anymore, we still believe in the vision, and they will fly in a new executive team. So they'll typically fire all of you as founders, as CEOs, CTOs, and so on, get rid of you, replace you with seasoned executives, and they'll carry on the story. And if that fails, and they have to give you more money, you're generally kicked out of the company entirely. You're diluted down to absolutely nothing, and your company will do whatever it takes to make the investor the money back. A classic example of this is, has anyone seen what's happened with Sonatype, the company that used to run Maven? Okay, so Sonatype started out as a Java build tool company professionally supporting Maven. They've now taken their Series C. The original founder of Sonatype, Jason Van Zyl's exited. He's gone out to start a new company, and Sonatype is now a security company. Right? Nothing to do with build tools or anything like that. They're now a security company evaluating open source software and doing security stuff. So it's a valuable lesson there. Being a business, identify early when you need professional help. Right? As engineers, I'm sorry to say, you probably will suck at being business people. Most of you do. Some of you will have the capacity to learn to be a business person, to be a CEO, to be a COO, whatever it takes. And a good investor or a good team will give you a chance to become that person, right? But it's a very, very different skill set. Learning to sell, learning to do marketing, learning to run a business administration-wise, learning about tax law, trademarks, patents, all that sort of stuff. It's a very different skill set to sitting down and hacking out code. So identify the gaps that you're going to have in your company really early and try and bring people on board, and you're going to have to bribe them with equity, unfortunately, to help you build a real business around your product or service. And the key person to get in early is the person who will understand how to get you customers and how to get you revenue. And this is the biggest problem we faced early on in our days, is that we didn't have anybody in our company who knew how to do that. So we sold the occasional license here and there because we speak on the conference circuit and people know us reasonably well, but we never got a steady stream of income. It's only recently that we've actually brought professional salespeople on board that this has started to happen, right? And that nearly killed our business completely. What else have I got there? So administration, I've alluded to this before, it matters as much as your product, right? If you don't have a really smooth sales pipeline and infrastructure behind the scenes that are like bringing in your customers, funneling them through, identifying who are good targets, so on and so forth, your company is going to fail very, very quickly, no matter how good your product is. Culture. So startups are very, very different to the typical businesses that most of you probably work in today. It's especially hard, I think, for people who are traditionally Java developers who work typically in big enterprises. When you move into a startup, there's nobody there to hold your hand, right? So there's no HR lady or man. There's nobody in accounts who will raise that invoice for you. There's no one who will sort out your payroll for you, so on and so forth. So you have to do everything yourself. So if you're not the sort of person who gets up early in the morning and is a bit of a self-starter, then I strongly recommend don't do a startup. And I know a lot of developers traditionally like to get up at 10 or 11 and maybe code late, etc. Unfortunately, when you're running a business, you have to get up at the crack of dawn and you'll be working all day, working on a whole bunch of really boring stuff you don't really like doing. And week after week after week, it's a grind. So the culture you have to have within your startup is that it has to be very closely knit. Everybody has to implicitly trust each other. You can't have a command and control structure. So if you have the traditional CEO and everyone reports to the other senior people report to the CEO and they have technical team leads and senior developers and junior developers below that, it slows the company down too much. Right? As a startup, you have to move much more quickly than that. So you have to have a very, very flat hierarchy. And you have to be prepared that you're going to have fights. Everyone's going to be very stressed. So it's a little bit like going home to Christmas and fighting with your family. So you have to fight, forgive, and move on. And we've had plenty of fights at jClarity. And we've all had to learn to forgive each other and move on. Next piece of advice is about the sharks out there in the industry and the vampires and the leeches, and there are lots of them. They're called lawyers and venture capitalists and angel investors. I hope are there any venture capitalists in the room at the moment? Good, because I'm going to insult you. No. So, I hate the term angel investors. It makes them sound like they're really benevolent and they're just there to help the poor little struggling technologist trying to build their company. They're business people. They're professional investors. They're there to make money. That's the one thing you have to learn about all investors. They're not doing it out of the bottom of their hearts. They're not doing it because they're kind people. They're not a charity. They want a return at the end of the day. And the nice investor who's there with you for the first few weeks, you know, giving you mentoring, introducing you to more clients, and generally acting and being very helpful, that person turns into a very nasty, horrible loan shark as soon as your company stops generating the revenue that they're expecting you to generate. So be very wary of angels. Be extremely wary of venture capitalists. They are definitely there just to make money. And they're there to make, they're there to try and make the 10x return. And if you're one of the companies in their portfolio that's not looking like they're going to make the 10x return, you're going to get thrown on the garbage heap very, very quickly. Lawyers. Get a good lawyer. Get a very good lawyer. Lawyers are a necessary evil and a necessary expense. So make sure you get a very, very good one. We do have some good people on board at jClarity, so I'll just can quickly recommend them. Our investors are currently a small investment arm in London called a.k.a. Capital. They specialize in small stage startups, and they kind of work with you right the way through, and they've been very, very good. But to a point, they are investors, and they do expect jClarity's revenue to start doing this. And if not, my tenure as CEO will probably not last much longer than September 2015, right? Despite as friendly and nice as they're being now. Realistically, they've given us money and they will expect a return. We have awesome lawyers in DWF. They're really, really cool. My general counsel wears a suit more expensive than my monthly run rate. And that's a good sign. Always have lawyers that your clients are going to be equally scared of, right? Because a lot of our customers are really big investment banks. I'm not going to name any of them for legal reasons, but they're the top tier 1 investment banks in the world. They have extremely scary lawyers. So we have to also have extremely scary lawyers to face off against them in the boardroom. It works well. It means as a small startup we don't get pushed around so much. I'm going to talk a little bit about technology. So for what we were building, we had to choose a very modern stack. We're a software as a service product primarily, so we need to make sure we can scale horizontally, so on and so forth. And we have security and data protection concerns. And for those of you who are thinking of building any sort of software as a service or a product which is going to go global, these types of concerns, which you may not have had as a day-to-day Java developer working in your enterprise, become very, very real. Right, so you have to learn things about like the safe harbor agreement between the UK and the US about data protection. You have to understand that Germany has extremely strict privacy and data protection laws, less so than the rest of Europe, so on and so forth. So, some of the technologies we chose. We chose Chef to do our automation. It's very useful. Chef has been actually really good for us. Unfortunately, it is Ruby, which makes us a little bit sad. But the great thing is, when I go into demo to a customer, I can hit a single button on our demo dashboard. It goes away and spins up 10 AWS nodes. It builds them all up to the right level of security patches and Ubuntu and everything else that demo Linux box needs. It deploys our service on there. It deploys our agents on there, kicks them all up, throws data against them, and this is all automated, right? I don't have to log in, I don't have to SSH in, I don't have to do any of that stuff. So Chef has been really, really good. We use a technology called Vertex to build our core application stack. Who has heard of Vertex? Yeah? Highly, highly recommend it. It is absolutely fantastic. Traditional Java EE servers and the technology stacks they support, they just don't scale for the cloud. They don't scale for the web. Not quite yet. Java EE7 and things like Wildfly, supporting microkernels and microcontainers. It's getting a lot better, but if we wanted to horizontally scale, there was no way we were going to deploy, 100 WebLogics or IBM WebSpheres across our nodes. It's just never going to work, right? There's just too much cruft and fluff involved in those big stacks. So Vertex is really great. Basically, you just spin up independent verticals, each one on its own thread, and you can run any JVM language you like on that vertical, and there's sort of this idea of this shared global event bus. Some people call it Node.js for the JVM, sort of on steroids though. So we were able to make really cool technology choices because of Vertex. If there was a particular problem we had which needed some scripting, we could write a groovy vertical, right? Before Java 8 came out, we were doing a lot of functional message handling. We're doing a lot of message handling, a lot of callbacks, a lot of event loopbacks. We were able to experiment with Scala and other functional languages to solve that problem. So, very helpful. There are lots of problems with Vertex. It's got a not invented here logging, so that's definitely a problem. And it was originally architected for local data centers, not for the open internet. So you have problems like the event bus and the communications are not SSL'd by default, which is a bit of a problem when you're crapping customer data across the open internet. Mongodb, one of my favorites. It has gotten a lot better. So some positives about Mongo. It has saved us a number of times, and the thing is, because it replicates all of its data across its various nodes and its rep sets, we have actually had servers completely go down without us knowing, and Mongo just swapped masters, and that was all fine. So it certainly has some positives. It has a really simple document object model, which is great. When you're in a startup, and one of the key problems you have is when you're first storing data about your customers and your product and your service, you don't really know what shape that's in. And so having a relational database which really constrains you is a very bad technology choice, basically. And we still don't really know what data we're storing. So at the moment, we're just basically dumping just documents down until we can figure that out, until we can do proper analysis over it. Security is definitely a problem. If you want an SSL'd Mongo, you actually have to buy it from Mongo, or you can compile your own with SSL enabled from scratch. So again, when we first started our service, we didn't realize for the first 2 months that our customer data was being sent across the open internet from each Mongo unsecured. That was a bit of a problem. We lost a customer or two over that. Groovy was really helpful to start with, but Java 8 has largely made Groovy irrelevant for us anyway. We primarily used it because of closures. It was very useful again for our event callback handlers and things. Angularjs. Who here is going to be building a startup which has a mobile or a web component to it? Yeah, right. So you're going to enter this really ugly world of having to build a rich client user interface in JavaScript, and it's not pretty. AngularJS is probably one of the better attempts out there to kind of make it sane. So I don't know how many of you here currently write JavaScript. It's an ugly little language. Unfortunately, it looks like we're going to be stuck with it. I'm not entirely sure whether Google's Dart is going to make any serious headway. But AngularJS actually allows you to write very well-defined modular JavaScript with directives, and it sort of makes your client UI sane. That said, you're still back in the horrible old days where you're kind of having to write source code to lay out your user interface, right? So you don't have any visual aid or visual design tools to help you design your user interface. So it's still a a very slow, mundane, error-prone process over, say, coding Java effects or Swing in an IDE which has visual support for that. So going all the way back to talking about user interface and user experience experts, one of the key things you'll need to do for your startup if you are going to go mobile or web is you have to bring on somebody who's got a lot of experience and who is really battle-hardened at building user interfaces, okay? Especially if you're going to be using JavaScript. Probably the biggest cost for us to date has been hiring outside experts to help us build our user interfaces. Because when we tried to do it ourselves, it took us about 6 months to knock out 1 or 2 decent screens. We have a lot of complex data and a lot of complex interaction. And again, it almost killed us as a company. We couldn't actually build it fast enough because we didn't have the expertise in-house. And the tooling and the IDE support around JavaScript UI is just not there quite yet. So there's some horrible negatives about Angularjs, and this is just JavaScript in general, I think, on the client side. There are a lot of issues with the testing framework and stuff around it, right? So as a Java developer, you're used to JUnit, mocking frameworks, code coverage, static code analysis, all of these useful things that you can run in your continuous integration server and get lots of great feedback on your code and things like that. With the JavaScript world, again, it's gotten a lot better in the past year or two. But you really have a hodgepodge of small, annoying frameworks that don't quite work together, don't work in a continuous integration server, so on and so forth. So it's a lot harder to deal with. So as a summary, because I want to try and leave as much time for questions as possible, you have to be lean and agile if you're going to have a startup, right? So any idea that you have of the way you might work in your enterprise today, you need to throw that out the window. You need to work with colleagues who are prepared to work in that way as well. Okay, I've seen a lot of startups fail with people who come out of enterprises and just don't know how to work in a small team, agile kind of manner. And they're too used to having the support of an enterprise around them to get the job done. You need to pick flexible technology. If you pick an inflexible technology, if we'd, for example, picked Oracle Relational Database at the heart of our product, we would have quickly screwed ourselves, right? Because it wouldn't scale horizontally, so on and so forth. Key thing is that your precious idea means basically nothing until you've built an actual product or a service that people are paying for around it. And this is probably the biggest mistake that technologists make. Most startups fail in the year because technologists, they build their product and their service, and they never get it out to market. They never find the customers, and that's why most of them fail. So, if you read Hacker News and you think you're going to code something up over the weekend and get 1 million users just because you have a website, don't. The one or two few success stories that come out of Silicon Valley, so things like WhatsApp, so on and so forth, they're a massive anomaly, right? They're 1 in 1 million events. I think the current statistics on startups, certainly in the UK anyway, is that 7 out of 8 fail in the first year. 99% of them fail within the first 2 years. And I think it's 99.9% of them fail a few years after that. The ones that do make it, most of them just turn into decent, steady businesses. Right? It's only about 1 in 10,000 that kind of make it big and exit and get splashed all over the news. WhatsApp was actually a really interesting example. If you looked at WhatsApp closely behind the scenes, WhatsApp actually do charge, I think it's $1 per year for their service now, and they had 300 million users. That's what made them a $9 billion or $16 billion company. Right? It wasn't the 300 million users, it was the fact they could extract $1 worth of revenue out of each of those, and investors could see they could expand on that. So customers and revenue is the one important thing. Repeat that as a mantra to yourself. When you're in a startup, it's a long haul. Most startups don't start seeing revenue equal run rate till about year 5, 6, or 7. So you spend a lot of your initial years really, really stressed, so you will feel like this. But here's the upside. you don't work for this guy anymore. You become that guy, if it's yourself. So hopefully there's time, a good 5 minutes left for questions. If you want to have a look at what we're doing, that's our website there. We do some interesting products, and we have quite a few interesting blog posts on startups and things. But yeah, for now, I'll just take any random question in the front.
How long would you still be working at a proper job before starting, like dropping everything and going for a startup? What would be the point?
So when
should you even do that?
When you should go do a startup. So one of the things you need to make sure, especially if you've got family or people who are dependent on you financially, is you need to ensure that you've got at least 1, preferably 2 years of income behind you before you go do a startup. It is so much harder to get revenue out of a startup to pay you a decent salary than anybody would ever expect. And again, a lot of startups fail simply because the core people involved, they've got mouths to feed, right? They've got rent to pay. So what we recommend in London is that you quit your permanent job, you actually go contracting or consulting for a year, because in London that's highly profitable. You go work for an investment bank, save up at least a year or two salary, then go do the startup, if you've got family and stuff. If you don't, then maybe you can be a bit riskier and just quit your job and go for it. But yeah. Oh. Comment from Kirk is offload all of your debt as quickly as you can before you go do it, right? So if you've got mortgages and things like that, yeah, tough. Hi.
You're talking about honesty towards your clients, and that it is useful to be brutal honest, but my experience is totally different. You said the customer is the one you be honest to, but mostly it's the boss of your customer is made the decision to buy you, and the person currently yelling at the phone at you is not your customer. But he can make you really pain if you don't do what he likes, and if you admit that you made a mistake, they make you make bigger problems than you can imagine. So it's sometimes easier to talk, oh, it's not a real problem, it's a problem there and there, it's a network, network issue, and not admit that you made a mistake, because they will kill you with it.
Yeah. So I'll answer that one. So the issue gentleman raised is that often it's not the end customer who is a happy user of your product, but it's their boss who actually paid for the product or the service who is angry because you've not done something right. I would argue you've got a customer relationship problem there, right? You should have an existing relationship with the person who holds the purse strings. That's really, really important. And when we have a production problem, the first person I personally call, as well, I mean, my engineers go talk to their engineers and say, look, there's a problem, we're dealing with it. I call the person with the purse strings and tell them, we've screwed up, this is what we're going to do about it, you're a valued customer, we'll have the service back for you in 2 hours. And by way of apology, we're cutting your license fee by half for the next month. So that's how we deal with those situations. Got 3 minutes left. So sorry, just up there was a question, I think, before. Yep, up at the back.
Just a short, how did you do the marketing? You don't have any marketing people, as far as I know, so...
Yeah. How do we do the marketing? We currently really don't do an awful lot of marketing. What we try and do is there's a couple of things we've done. We have a blog which we write really interesting content for, which we syndicate out with a bunch of other companies in the Java space, and we all share each other's content. We all share each other's content on sites like Reddit, dzone, InfoQ, so on and so forth. So we have an informal marketing circle with other small Java companies at the moment. We make sure we have good product placements on the sorts of websites that people who are interested in our domain go to. So if you go to javaperformancetuning.com, which is a site run by a guy called Jack Shirazi, and you look for performance analysis tools, you'll find our tools at the top of the list. So we get a lot of direct traffic from there. We haven't, as of yet, done the whole spend tons of money on marketing, Google SEO, throwing T-shirts out at conferences, that sort of thing. Question at the front here. Hi.
You said you now work with some sales guys. How do you work with them? You pay for results, you pay salaries, you pay some agency.
So the salespeople we currently work with, we do pay them a base salary, and that's actually really important because a salesperson, like anyone else, has also got mouths to feed and rent to pay or a mortgage to pay. So you have to give them, a base level of comfort so they don't go out and do stupid, desperate things. This is key because desperate salespeople will promise things that your company can't deliver, or will do a deal with the customer that you don't agree with because they're desperate to try and bring in their commission. So we do pay them a base salary. It's a low base salary. It's almost the minimum wage in the UK. And then we have a graduating scale of commission. So the larger deals they sign, they get higher commission on those. And most importantly, we still also give commission on renewals. It's very important for us to retain our customers. So we make sure our salespeople are rewarded for that. Question over there.
Do you have any idea what goes on in the mind of investors? For example, the investors that pay 2 million for the Yo app.
Yes, I do know what goes in the minds of investors. The key thing for investors is that investors at a venture capitalist firm in particular, they will have what's known as a portfolio of company. And so you typically will invest in 10 different companies with the hope that one of them will give you the 10 or 100 times return. So that's the way investors think. So they will typically invest in 4 or 5 what they see as pretty solid, sure bets, and then they'll also start taking bets in absolutely crazy blue sky thinking mad companies like putting 2 million into Yo, right? Because you never know when something like Twitter will take off as an investor. So you might just get that magical 100x return. So that's the way they think. It's a calculated risk. But apart from the 2 million they put into Yo, I bet you they also put in 4 or 5 million into 8 or 9 other really solid companies, which are far more likely to succeed. In the middle there.
How many were you before and in your team and after founding?
So, right, yes. How many before and after funding? The same number. This is actually quite key. So we've only taken a very small amount of funding on, what you would call maybe only a sort of seed money or very low-level angel money. And we've primarily spent it on the user interface developers that we've actually outsourced that work to. We did hire our first salesperson, so that is the extra person we did actually bring on board. And we converted some of the founders and some of the original people involved with the company into actual proper employees. So, but again, your run rate is really, really crucial. So when you do take money on, don't go out immediately on day one and hire a team of 20 people and so on and so forth. Use it to build slowly. I think we're out of time. So if you have more questions, just come down and see me while I'm packing up. And thank you very much for your time.